I never imagined that simply standing up to my HOA over a footbridge to my sister's island would spectacularly uncover a multi-million-dollar corruption scheme, entangling politicians, developers, and even my nosy neighbors. Honestly, how was I supposed to know that fighting for my fundamental right to visit my cancer-stricken sister would ultimately trigger FBI raids and secret recordings powerful enough to dismantle an entire criminal enterprise? It all began rather innocently. I was just tending to my garden one afternoon when the official HOA letter arrived. On that unmistakable bright yellow paper, their unsubtle way of screaming, "This is serious." My hands trembled quite embarrassingly as I read the stark words, "Unauthorized structure, must be removed within 30 days." They were talking about the simple wooden footbridge I'd built the previous summer. It was, crucially, the only direct path to my sister Sarah's island home, nestled in Lake Pinewood. "This can't be happening," I whispered, sinking onto my porch steps in disbelief. You see, Sarah's battle with cancer had recently taken a turn for the worse. That bridge wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. It transformed a grueling 45-minute drive around the lake into a simple 3-minute walk. She desperately needed me close by, especially on those brutal days following her chemo treatments. Naturally, I immediately called the HOA office, but predictably, nobody answered. Of course not. Brenda Peterson, the board president, only seemed to work when it conveniently suited her schedule. It became clear I'd have to confront her directly at the upcoming board meeting the next day. Sleep absolutely refused to come easy that night. I tossed and turned endlessly, my mind racing, consumed by worst-case scenarios. Without that bridge, how would I manage to get Sarah her vital medications, her groceries? Even more terrifying, how would I possibly reach her quickly if she had an emergency? The community center buzzed with hushed whispers when I arrived the next morning. About 20 neighbors sat in meticulously neat rows of folding chairs, while 5 board members perched importantly behind a long table at the front. Brenda Peterson sat dead center, her silver-streaked bob perfectly styled, reading glasses dangling elegantly from a chain around her neck. "Next item," Brenda announced curtly, not even bothering to look up from her agenda. "Enforcement actions for unapproved structures." I raised my hand immediately. "I'd like to discuss the violation notice regarding my footbridge." Brenda's eyes narrowed instantly. "Amelia Hayes, 42 Lakeside Drive? Yes, we've thoroughly documented your unpermitted construction. The bridge violates 3 separate covenants, but it's entirely on my private property," I countered, standing up to meet her gaze. "And furthermore, it connects to my sister's island, which isn't even part of the HOA's jurisdiction. The shoreline itself falls under our purview," Brenda replied, coldly unmoved. "You unequivocally failed to submit the proper plans for approval." "My sister has stage 3 breast cancer," I explained, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. "That bridge is quite literally her lifeline. I take her to treatments. I bring her meals. Personal circumstances, however unfortunate, do not exempt anyone from the rules," Brenda interrupted sharply. "The board's decision is unanimous." From the corner of my eye, I saw Gary Miller nod smugly. He'd moved in next door just 6 months ago and had immediately started complaining about practically everything. My wind chimes, my bird feeder, and now, apparently, my bridge. Yet somehow, his massive boat, constantly parked conspicuously in his driveway, never seemed to receive a citation. Strange, isn't it? "I'll appeal," I stated firmly. "You're certainly welcome to try." Brenda's tight smile didn't reach her eyes. "But just so we're clear, construction on that eyesore stops immediately, and removal begins next week." As the meeting mercifully ended, Maya Chen, a young mum from down the street, cautiously touched my arm. "This happened to me too," she whispered urgently. They made me tear down my children's playset last month, said it was too visible from the lake. How can they possibly get away with this? I asked, bewildered. Well, Maya explained quietly, Brenda's husband plays golf regularly with the county commissioner, and furthermore, half the board members work for Pine Harbor Development. They basically control everything around here. Walking home, deflated, I noticed Gary Miller standing brazenly on his deck, photographing my property with a telephoto lens. When he saw me watching, incredibly, he didn't even pretend to be doing something else. Instead, he smirked and gave a smug little wave. That afternoon, I called Sarah. The HOA is making me take down the bridge. What? Why? Her voice sounded thin, noticeably weaker than last week. They claim I didn't get the proper permits, but Sarah, I checked thoroughly before building it. The county explicitly said I didn't need any since it doesn't cross public land. This isn't right, Amelia, Sarah sighed wearily. Without that bridge, I know, but I'll fight it, I promised, trying to inject confidence I didn't feel. Meanwhile, I'll just use my kayak to bring your groceries. In winter, that's not safe, Sarah protested immediately. Maybe I should just sell this place. Move closer to you. Don't you dare. I said firmly. That island has been in our family for 3 generations. Mum and Dad left it specifically to you because they knew how much you loved it. We'll figure something out. After hanging up, determined, I pulled out my property maps and the ridiculously thick HOA bylaws. There had to be a loophole somewhere. 3 painstaking hours later, I found it. The HOA bylaws only controlled construction that was visible from community property. Therefore, if I could definitively prove the bridge wasn't visible from any common areas, they couldn't legally force its removal. I grabbed my camera and headed out immediately, documenting every conceivable angle. Just as I suspected, the bridge was completely hidden by trees from the community dock, utterly invisible from the main road, and barely noticeable from the water unless you were specifically looking for it. Success. My phone rang just as I finished taking photos. An unfamiliar number. Hello, Ms. Hayes? This is David Rossi from Pine Harbor Development. I understand you're having some difficulties with your property. My stomach tightened instantly. How did you get my number? Small community, he chuckled smoothly. Listen, I might have a solution that works for everyone. We've actually been quite interested in acquiring waterfront parcels in your area. If you happen to be open to selling, we could potentially make this little HOA problem disappear. I'm not selling my property, I said flatly. Think about it, David continued, his voice like silk. We'd offer well above market value, your sister's place too, enough for both of you to relocate somewhere, perhaps more accommodating to your needs. I hung up without answering, my mind reeling. I immediately called Sarah. Did someone from Pine Harbor just contact you? Yes, Sarah sounded alarmed. How did you know? They called me too. Something's definitely not right here. That night, I plunged into researching Pine Harbor Development. Unsurprisingly, they'd been aggressively buying up lakefront properties throughout the county, systematically turning quiet residential areas into luxury condos and resorts. Interestingly, their latest major project had stalled due to one single holdout owner who steadfastly refused to sell. The next morning, a construction crew arrived unannounced at my property. A tall man in a hard hat approached me, clipboard in hand. Amelia Hayes, we're here to begin removal of the unauthorized structure. You can't do that, I protested, standing my ground. I filed an appeal. The HOA has to review it before any action can be taken. The foreman just shrugged indifferently. My orders come directly from the board president. You can take it up with her. Resolutely, I planted myself firmly on the bridge. I'm not moving. This is private property, and furthermore, you don't have permission to be here. The workers looked distinctly uncomfortable. The foreman made a quick call, speaking in hushed tones, before approaching me again. "Okay, we'll postpone today's removal," he conceded reluctantly. "But fair warning, we'll be back tomorrow with the sheriff, if necessary." After they finally left, I drove straight to the county records office. I desperately needed to understand exactly what rights the HOA actually had over my property. The clerk pulled up my deed and then frowned. "That's strange," she mumbled, leaning closer to her screen. "What is it?" I asked anxiously. "According to this, there's a pending petition to redraw the shoreline boundaries in your specific area. It was filed 3 months ago by," she squinted at the screen, "Pine Harbor Development." My blood ran cold. What would that mean for waterfront properties like mine? Well, if approved, the new boundary would effectively place all shoreline construction under county jurisdiction. Consequently, that would require permits that weren't previously needed. And those permits, I guessed, dread pooling in my stomach, would be approved by the County Zoning Commission? "That's correct," she confirmed, chaired by Commissioner Phillips, the very same commissioner who regularly played golf with Brenda's husband. Suddenly, the pieces started falling into a deeply disturbing pattern. Driving home, my phone rang. It was Maya again. "Amelia, you need to come to my house right now. There's someone here you absolutely need to meet." 20 minutes later, I found myself sitting in Maya's living room with 4 other neighbors, all apparently victims of seemingly random yet suspiciously targeted HOA violations. Ben Carter had been forced to remove his boat dock. Elderly Mrs. Gable faced weekly fines for her supposedly non-conforming garden flowers. The Patel family had been denied permission to add a simple sunroom. Yet, curiously, Brenda's identical addition had been approved without a single issue. "This isn't random," stated a man I didn't recognize. "I'm Robert Davis, former HOA treasurer. I resigned last year when I noticed highly irregular payments being made to a consulting company that, as far as I could tell, doesn't actually exist." "Why didn't you report it?" I asked, astonished. "I tried," Robert said grimly. "The day after I spoke discreetly to a county investigator, my house was broken into. Intriguingly, nothing valuable was taken, but all my financial records were scattered everywhere. The message was crystal clear." "So what do we do?" Mrs. Gable asked, her hands trembling slightly. "We fight back," I said, surprising even myself with my newfound determination. "Together, starting with saving my bridge." As I drove home, headlights suddenly appeared in my rearview mirror, following uncomfortably close. The car stayed right behind me, turn after turn. My heart pounded against my ribs as I finally pulled into my driveway. The vehicle slowed as it passed my house, a black SUV with heavily tinted windows. I couldn't see the driver, but I distinctly recognized the Pine Harbor Development logo emblazoned on the door. Inside my house, I meticulously locked every door and window, then cautiously peeked through the blinds. There stood Gary Miller in his driveway, phone pressed to his ear, openly watching my home. Just then, my phone pinged with a text message from an unknown number. "Selling would be easier than fighting. Some battles aren't worth the cost." The early morning darkness was thick as fog when I slipped silently out my back door, armed only with a flashlight and my phone camera. I crept stealthily toward the bridge. If they planned to destroy it today, I absolutely needed evidence of its condition before they arrived. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Are you okay? Couldn't sleep? Worrying about you?" "I'm fine," I quickly replied. "Just documenting the bridge before they come. Stay put." The wooden planks creaked eerily under my feet as I walked the length of the bridge, filming every detail. The hand-carved railings Dad had patiently taught me to make, the reinforced supports designed to withstand lake flooding, the careful construction that meticulously preserved the natural shoreline. Suddenly, a twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding violently. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice sounding small and fragile in the vast darkness. No answer. But then the beam of my flashlight caught a flicker of movement in the bushes near my property line. A shadow darted away, disappearing into the trees. Rushing back home, I locked myself in and called the non-emergency police line. Officer Miller, the same bored-looking officer from before, arrived about 30 minutes later, dutifully jotting down notes. "Probably just animals, ma'am," he said with a dismissive yawn, "but we'll keep an eye out during patrols." "This isn't the first strange thing that's happened," I insisted firmly. "Someone's been watching my house, following me." "Any proof?" he asked skeptically. "Well, no, but call us if you see something concrete," he interrupted, handing me his card before leaving. By sunrise, a different kind of threat materialized. 3 large trucks from Lakeside Construction pulling up ominously to my driveway. Brenda Peterson stepped regally out of her silver Mercedes behind them, clipboard clutched in her hand. "Ms. Hayes," she called out, her voice dripping with false cheerfulness, "I certainly hope you've reconsidered your position. The crew is ready to remove the unauthorized structure." I stepped onto my porch, my phone secretly recording in my pocket. I filed an appeal, complete with documentation proving the bridge doesn't violate any HOA covenants whatsoever. You cannot legally touch it until that appeal is heard. Brenda's smile tightened perceptibly. "The emergency board meeting held last night officially denied your appeal. Notice was posted on the community bulletin board." "At night? That's hardly proper notification," I countered hotly. "And as the property owner directly affected by this decision, I absolutely should have been informed personally." "Rules are rules, Amelia," Brenda said, her patience visibly thinning. "Now please step aside so the work can begin." "I have a court order," I lied boldly, gambling heavily that she wouldn't call my bluff. "Any attempt to remove this bridge before the county hearing scheduled for next week will result in contempt charges." Brenda's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Show me this order." "My attorney has it," I fibbed smoothly, hoping she couldn't hear my heart racing like a drum. "He'll be here within the hour. Or," I added, standing as tall as I could, "you can proceed now and explain to a judge precisely why you chose to ignore due process." The construction foreman shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Peterson, if there are legal issues involved, perhaps we should wait." Brenda glared daggers first at him, then at me. "Fine," she snapped. "You have until Monday. Then that bridge comes down, court order or not." As the trucks finally pulled away, my knees nearly buckled with overwhelming relief. I hadn't actually expected the bluff to work, but incredibly, it had bought me precious time. My phone rang almost immediately. "Amelia, it's Robert Davis. Maya told me what's happening. Meet me at Cedar Creek Coffee in 20 minutes." The small cafe, located conveniently in the next town over, was nearly empty. Robert sat tucked away in the back corner, a thick manila folder resting on the table in front of him. "I've been quietly gathering evidence ever since I resigned," he explained, opening the folder. Inside were financial records, clearly showing irregular payments, board meeting minutes that had obviously been altered after the fact, and property assessments that had magically changed value after certain owners refused to sell. I scanned the damning documents, my coffee growing cold beside me. This was serious fraud, at the very minimum. "It gets worse," Robert said, lowering his voice significantly. "Pine Harbor isn't just building luxury homes. Apparently, their parent company owns substantial stakes in casinos. The lake resort they're planning? That's just Phase 1. Phase 2 includes a large private entertainment venue designed to conveniently sidestep existing gambling restrictions on county land." "How is that even possible?" I asked, stunned. "State Senator Thompson introduced a bill last year cleverly creating a loophole specifically for hospitality entertainment zones. And guess who donated heavily to his campaign? The Pine Harbor CEO. I sat back, utterly speechless. So, my little bridge is standing in the way of a multi-million-dollar casino development? Your property, and more importantly, your sister's island, are the final missing pieces they absolutely need, Robert confirmed grimly. Without them, they can't create the continuous shoreline their ambitious plans require. No wonder they're so desperate, I murmured, the full picture finally clicking into place. But why not just offer more money? I wondered aloud. Robert smiled sadly. They tried that first, didn't they? But people like you and your sister, people with deep roots and strong principles, you're their worst nightmare. Driving home, my mind buzzing, I called Sarah. We need to meet, urgently, not on the phone. Can you come over tonight? I have chemo today, she reminded me gently. I'll be too sick afterwards. Then I'll come to you, I insisted. And Sarah, don't talk to anyone about your property. Absolutely no one. Getting to Sarah's island without the bridge meant taking my kayak. I carefully packed waterproof bags with the crucial documents, a fresh sweater for Sarah, and a container of her favorite homemade soup. As I dragged my kayak toward the water's edge, a familiar black SUV cruised slowly past my house. This time, frustratingly, I clearly saw Gary Miller sitting in the passenger seat. The lake was choppy, making the journey unexpectedly difficult. By the time I finally reached Sarah's dock, my arms ached intensely, and I was soaked from the relentless splashing waves. But seeing my sister's pale, worried face peering out the window made every single strenuous stroke worth it. You shouldn't have come in this weather, she scolded gently, helping me inside. We've got trouble, Sarah, I said gravely, unpacking the documents. Bigger trouble than we realized. Sarah listened intently as I explained everything Robert had told me. Her face grew more concerned with each disturbing detail. So that's why they've been calling me daily, she said, realization dawning. A man named Steve Evans keeps upping his offer for the island. Yesterday, he casually mentioned my medical bills like he knew exactly how much they were. A chill ran straight down my spine. Have you told anyone about your finances? Just my insurance company and the hospital, Sarah said. And you, of course. I thought immediately of Gary Miller watching my house, the anonymous threatening text messages, the constant unnerving feeling of being followed. They're monitoring us somehow. But we spent hours meticulously reviewing our limited options. Selling was absolutely out of the question. This land had been in our family for generations. Fighting the HOA alone seemed utterly impossible, given their obvious connections and influence. But perhaps going public might work? Local news loves a good David versus Goliath story, I suggested hopefully, especially when cancer patients are being harassed by wealthy developers. Sarah looked uncertain. That's a big step, Amelia. These people clearly have a lot of power. So do we, I insisted firmly. Truth is power. Community is power. As night began to fall, I reluctantly prepared to leave. The lake would be treacherous in the darkness, but I absolutely needed to get home. Stay, Sarah urged, her voice filled with concern. It's not safe. I can't, I replied regretfully. If I'm not home when they potentially come back tomorrow, they might just start the demolition anyway. Halfway across the dark, choppy lake, my kayak light suddenly illuminated something floating ominously in the water just ahead. Floating debris. As I paddled closer, my blood ran cold. Wooden planks, railing posts, my bridge. They'd already begun destroying it under the cover of darkness. I paddled frantically toward my property. From the water, I could clearly see flashlights moving along my shoreline. The unmistakable sound of power tools echoed eerily across the otherwise silent lake. Pulling my phone from its waterproof case with trembling hands, I dialed 911. There are people trespassing on my property. They're destroying my bridge without permission, I reported, trying desperately to keep my voice steady. We'll send someone right away, the dispatcher promised calmly. I stayed hidden in my kayak, concealed by the darkness, watching helplessly as three figures worked quickly and efficiently to dismantle what remained of the bridge. One of them was definitely Gary Miller. The others, frustratingly, I couldn't identify in the darkness. 20 excruciatingly long minutes later, police lights finally flashed at the end of my driveway. The trespassers immediately scattered, disappearing like ghosts into the dense woods between our properties. Officer Miller, the very same officer from that morning, spoke with me as I finally reached the shore, exhausted and furious. "You're sure they didn't have permission?" he asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Of course I'm sure," I exclaimed, exasperated. "It's my bridge on my property." "Well," Officer Miller said, consulting his notes nonchalantly, "according to HOA records, they actually scheduled this removal, with your consent, signed documentation and everything." My blood boiled instantly. "They forged my signature. That's illegal." "That's a very serious accusation, ma'am," Officer Miller replied, stiffly. "Do you have any proof?" In that chilling moment, I realized just how deep this conspiracy truly ran. Police, HOA, developers, all seemingly working together seamlessly. "Not yet," I admitted reluctantly, "but I will." After Officer Miller finally left, I surveyed the heartbreaking damage. The bridge was now halfway dismantled, completely unsafe to cross. Getting to Sarah would now require either the kayak or the long 45-minute drive around the lake. Inside my house, I collapsed onto the couch, utter exhaustion and despair washing over me like a tidal wave. Then my eyes caught something on my coffee table that definitely hadn't been there before, a business card for Pine Harbor Development with a chilling, handwritten note scrawled on the back. "Final offer, $750,000 for your property, $1.2 million for your sister's island. This offer expires tomorrow." Someone had been inside my house. With shaking hands, I started frantically checking rooms, closets, under beds. Nothing seemed disturbed or out of place, but the sheer violation of my personal space left me trembling uncontrollably. I immediately called Robert Davis. "They broke into my house," I whispered, instinctively afraid of being overheard. "Get out of there, Amelia, now," he urged immediately. "Come to my place. Bring whatever evidence you have." "I can't leave," I argued stubbornly. "If I go, they win. If you stay, you might get seriously hurt," Robert countered forcefully. "This isn't just about a bridge anymore, Amelia." As if to dramatically punctuate his warning, my lights suddenly went out, plunging the entire house into absolute darkness. Through my window, however, I could clearly see that the rest of the neighborhood still had power. Just then, my phone pinged with a new text message. "Last chance to accept our generous offer. Things get complicated after tonight." Adrenaline surging, I grabbed my emergency flashlight, the crucial documents, and my laptop, then slipped silently out my back door. I wouldn't stay where they could easily find me, but I absolutely wouldn't run away either. Instead, I headed straight for Maya Chen's house. Together, somehow, we would build a case stronger than any bridge. As I crept cautiously through backyards, carefully avoiding the streetlights, a new, steely determination filled me. They had destroyed my bridge to my sister, yes, but in doing so, they'd inadvertently built something else entirely, a bridge between neighbors who had finally had enough of being bullied and pushed around. And perhaps, just perhaps, that connection might actually be strong enough to bring down the entire corrupt system. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as my small boat bounced uncomfortably over the choppy waves. Without my bridge, This exhausting 40-minute trip around the peninsula had unfortunately become my daily routine just to reach Sarah. Suddenly, the boat sputtered ominously. I smacked the dashboard in frustration. "Not today, please," I muttered under my breath. I simply couldn't afford repairs, not especially after the ridiculous $750 fine Brenda Peterson had slapped me with for improper bridge removal procedures, as if I had been the one to improperly remove it. Finally, thankfully, reaching Sarah's dock, I found her sitting quietly in her garden. She looked paler than yesterday, her favorite blue cardigan hanging loosely around her frail shoulders. "You won't believe what happened at my doctor's appointment," Sarah said, attempting a brave, upbeat tone. "Dr. Singh says I'm actually responding well to the new treatment." I hugged her gently, carefully hiding my own worry. "Sarah, that's amazing news." I busied myself unpacking the groceries and mail I'd brought over. While Sarah rested inside, I meticulously sorted her medications into the weekly pill organizer. My hands shook slightly, betraying the exhaustion from getting only about 3 hours of sleep the night before. But I couldn't let her see my struggle. "Stop pretending you're okay," Sarah called softly from the doorway, startling me. "Honestly, Amelia, you look worse than I do, and I'm the one with cancer." I sighed, defeated. "Okay, you caught me. I've been digging into something strange. Remember how the HOA suddenly raised fees significantly last year, supposedly for infrastructure improvements, but absolutely nothing changed around here?" Sarah nodded, sinking into a chair across from me at her cozy kitchen table. "Look at this," as I said, opening my laptop. "I requested public records for all HOA vendors. Check out this company, Green Valley Landscaping. They somehow received over $47,000 over the past 3 years. Sarah squinted at the screen. "For what? Planting a few flowers?" "Exactly, and guess who owns it?" I pulled up the relevant business registration. Kevin Peterson, Brenda's brother-in-law. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. "You think they're stealing money?" "Oh, it gets much worse, don't you?" I continued grimly, showing her the property records I'd downloaded. "It appears the HOA has been secretly buying up foreclosed homes through a shell company, 6 houses in just the last 2 years. And look who seems to be triggering these foreclosures." "Gary Miller?" Sarah whispered, instantly recognizing our neighbor's name. "Apparently he works for a mortgage servicing company," I explained, "and incredibly, every single one of these foreclosed homes was processed through his company, often involving tiny, almost insignificant paperwork errors that the overwhelmed homeowners simply couldn't fight." Thunder rumbled ominously outside as rain began to pelt fiercely against the windows. I knew I needed to head back before the storm worsened significantly. "Be careful with this information, Amelia," Sarah warned anxiously, walking me to the door. "These people sound genuinely dangerous." I hugged her goodbye, trying to project confidence. "I'll be fine. I'm meeting with Maya and Ben tonight to figure out our next step." The rain had transformed into a torrential downpour by the time I finally docked back at the marina. Soaked and shivering, I jogged quickly to my car, failing to notice the black SUV parked inconspicuously nearby. Opening my front door, I immediately sensed something was terribly wrong. My security system light, usually a steady green, flashed an alarming red. Inside, drawers hung open haphazardly, papers littered the floor, and perhaps most disturbingly, my desktop computer was gone. Heart pounding violently, I backed instinctively toward the door, but froze when I saw the kitchen counter. A single piece of paper sat there, an official HOA violation notice, ominously dated for today. "Unauthorized investigation of board activities, $2,500 fine." Just then my phone rang, making me jump nearly out of my skin. It was Maya, her voice trembling with panic. "Amelia, Ben just called me from his car. 2 men showed up at his house with an eviction notice. They actually changed the locks while he was at work. That's impossible, I gasped, quickly checking that my own doors were securely locked. He pays through automatic bank transfers. They claimed his last 6 payments were improperly processed. He has only 3 days to vacate. I peered cautiously through my blinds at the empty, rain-slicked street. This is clearly retaliation. They know we're onto them. There's something else, Maya whispered urgently. I followed Gary yesterday. He had lunch with someone important from Pine Harbor Development. I took photos. Send them to me, I said, grabbing my emergency bag from the closet. I'll come to your... You don't understand, Amelia, Maya interrupted, her voice strained. I overheard them talking about building permits for the resort. They specifically mentioned Sarah's Island as the final piece. They need her property, Amelia. Suddenly, all the pieces clicked violently into place. The bridge demolition, the constant harassment, the break-ins. Everything was strategically designed to isolate Sarah, to pressure her relentlessly into selling. I'm calling Sarah right now, I said, dialing with shaking fingers. No answer. Just then, my doorbell rang loudly, making me nearly drop the phone. Through the peephole, I saw 2 men in dark, severe suits standing stiffly under umbrellas. One held up a badge that glinted ominously in my porch light. Miss Amelia Hayes? Called a deep, authoritative voice. FBI, we'd like to ask you some questions about the Lakeside Community HOA. My breath caught sharply in my throat. Had Brenda actually reported me? Or was something much bigger happening? Please sit down, Ms. Hayes, said the taller FBI agent, flashing his badge again as they entered. I'm Special Agent Davis. This is Agent Bell. My living room suddenly felt like an elaborate trap. Were they really FBI or somehow working for Brenda? We've actually been investigating the Lakeside Community HOA for about 8 months now, Agent Davis continued calmly, pulling out a folder. Money laundering, wire fraud, racketeering. My mouth fell open. You're not here to arrest me? Agent Bell almost smiled. No, in fact, your bridge complaint actually helped us significantly. You've been documenting things we couldn't legally access without warrants. Relief flooded through me, immense and overwhelming, until Agent Davis added gravely, however, our surveillance indicates Brenda Peterson was tipped off about our investigation this morning. My blood ran instantly cold. My sister, she's alone on her island. We have agents heading there now, Agent Davis assured me, but I was already grabbing my keys, panic overriding everything else. Sarah's not answering her phone, I said urgently, rushing toward the door. I need to get to her. The agents followed me quickly out to my car. We'll drive, Agent Bell insisted firmly. Rain lashed violently against the windshield as we sped towards the marina, lightning periodically illuminating the angry, churning waves of the lake. Tell us everything you know, Agent Davis said seriously as we drove. I explained everything. The bridge saga, the mysterious foreclosures, Robert Davis's discoveries, the shell companies, the resort plans, Maya's overheard conversation. They desperately need Sarah's Island to complete their development, I emphasized. Without it, they can't build the resort. At the marina, we made a grim discovery. My boat's fuel line had been cleanly cut. This wasn't an accident, Agent Bell stated grimly, examining the precise slice. Agent Davis spoke urgently into his radio. Teams approaching from the North Shore need to expedite. We have evidence of an immediate threat. Then, I spotted my neighbor's kayak, still tied securely at the dock. I'm not waiting, I announced decisively, already untying it. Ms. Hayes, that's far too dangerous in this storm, Agent Davis called out, but I was already pushing off into the churning, treacherous water. Follow by road, I shouted back over the wind and rain. There's a longer route around the peninsula. The kayak bounced wildly on the massive waves as rain pelted my face relentlessly. Lightning cracked terrifyingly overhead, momentarily illuminating the distant, vulnerable shape of Sarah's island. My arms burned with the exertion of each frantic paddle stroke, but sheer fear drove me forward. Approaching Sarah's dock, hidden by the storm's fury, I spotted two unfamiliar black SUVs parked ominously near her house. Lights glowed from inside, and shadows moved urgently across the windows. Instead of tying the kayak visibly on top of the dock, I carefully secured it underneath, hidden from view. Then, I crept silently through the wet, dense underbrush toward the back of the house. Voices drifted clearly through an open window. The treatment center in Switzerland is the best in the world. A smooth, unfamiliar man's voice was saying, "All expenses paid, Ms. Reynolds. Sarah, just sign the papers." "I told you," Sarah's voice sounded thin, weaker than even this morning. "I'm not selling my home." "Your condition requires specialized care," another voice chimed in, Gary Miller's. "Care you simply can't afford without our generous help." Peering cautiously through the kitchen window, I saw Sarah backed against the counter. Gary Miller stood blocking one doorway, while a man in an expensive, perfectly tailored grey suit held papers menacingly in front of her. "My sister will be here soon," Sarah said, her chin raised defiantly despite her obvious paleness and fear. The suited man laughed dismissively. "Your sister, I'm afraid, is currently occupied with the FBI. A little misunderstanding we arranged. This must be Victor Martel, the Pine Harbor CDO Robert mentioned." My wet clothes clung heavily to my skin as I silently tried the back door. Locked. Adrenaline surging, I grabbed a heavy terracotta flower pot from Sarah's garden. The loud crash of breaking glass made everyone inside freeze instantly. I scrambled through the shattered window, cutting my hand on the jagged edges, but barely feeling the pain. "Actually, I'm right here," I announced breathlessly, stepping into the kitchen. "And now I understand exactly why you were so desperate to tear down my bridge." Gary spun around, his face twisting instantly with rage. "You should have minded your own damned business, Amelia." Sarah moved quickly toward me, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and terror. "Step away from my sister," I demanded fiercely, positioning myself protectively between Sarah and the two men. "Ms. Hayes," the suited man, Martel, adjusted his tie, seemingly unruffled. "I'm Victor Martel, Chief Development Officer for Pine Harbor Resort. We're simply offering your sister a very generous package." "You mean you're trying to bully a cancer patient into signing away her home?" I retorted hotly, "after systematically isolating her by destroying her only easy access to help." "Business is business," Martel shrugged callously. "This island is the centerpiece of our new resort, and every other property owner has signed because you forced illegal foreclosures through Gary's company." I countered sharply, watching Gary's face pale visibly. "You have no proof of anything," Gary snapped, but his eyes darted nervously toward Martel. "Actually, I have copies of everything," I bluffed confidently, "including recordings of your little lunch meeting yesterday discussing the resort plans and how to handle Sarah." Martel's smooth demeanor finally cracked. "Where are these supposed records?" "Safe," I replied coolly, "with people who will release them immediately if anything happens to us." Sarah spoke up then, her voice surprisingly stronger. "Get out of our house." Gary stepped toward us menacingly. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? Why don't you tell me?" I challenged, instinctively grabbing a large kitchen knife from the block behind me. Martel's smile turned utterly cold. "Pine Harbor Development doesn't take no for an answer. And neither," he added significantly, "does Senator Collins." My mind raced. Senator Robert Collins, the powerful state senator relentlessly pushing controversial waterfront development laws that conveniently weakened environmental protections. "So the senator himself is involved in your disgusting scheme?" I asked, trying desperately to stall for time. The FBI agents had to be close by now. "James, shut up," Gary hissed nervously at Martel. "It doesn't matter now," Martel waved dismissively. "Once we have this property, the project proceeds regardless of what they think they know." He then grabbed Sarah's arm roughly. "Just sign the damn papers." I lunged forward instinctively with the knife, not aiming to hurt, but to threaten. "Take your hands off her." Suddenly, bright blue and red lights flashed violently through the windows. A voice boomed through a megaphone. "FBI, the house is surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Martel's face drained instantly of all color. Gary released Sarah's arm as if it had burned him. "You led them here." Gary snarled venomously at me. "No," I replied calmly, meeting his gaze. "Your own greed did that." My phone buzzed insistently at 5 a.m. A text from Agent Davis. "Turn on your TV, now." I fumbled blearily for the remote. And there it was. Brenda Peterson, impeccably dressed, even now, in handcuffs, being led briskly from her pristine colonial home, while neighbors watched, stunned, in their bathrobes. The news anchor's serious voice filled my quiet living room. Breaking overnight, FBI raids homes of Pine Harbor HOA board members and associates in a massive fraud and conspiracy investigation. I sat there stunned, coffee completely forgotten in my hand. This was so much bigger than just my bridge. By noon, my doorbell wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, neighbors, even people I barely knew, all clamoring, asking what I knew. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I drove straight to the FBI field office, where Agent Davis had asked me to bring all the documentation I had gathered. "You've given us the missing pieces, Amelia," she said gratefully, spreading surveillance photos across a large metal table. "Look familiar?" The images clearly showed Brenda and her husband meeting secretly with developers at exclusive restaurants, exchanging thick envelopes, reviewing detailed maps that prominently featured Sarah's Island. In one particularly damning photo, Senator Collins himself stood beside Victor Martel, pointing emphatically at what looked like architectural plans for the resort. "We've been meticulously tracking the money for months," Agent Davis explained. "Over $4 million laundered through various shell companies owned by HOA board members and their families. Your neighbor, Gary Miller? Turns out he's actually a former real estate attorney who lost his license for fraud in another state years ago." My stomach dropped. But how did they possibly think they'd get away with essentially stealing Sarah's land? "They nearly did," Agent Davis admitted grimly. "The plan was actually quite elegant in a sinister way. Use petty HOA violations to systematically isolate your sister, cut off her support system entirely, then relentlessly pressure her to sell while she was at her most vulnerable, physically, emotionally, and financially. The bridge demolition was just the first crucial step. I thought of Sarah, alone on her island, bravely fighting cancer, while these vultures circled relentlessly overhead. My hands shook with fury. "Now, we need you to do something difficult, Amelia," Agent Davis said seriously, sliding a small, discreet recording device across the table toward me. "The emergency community meeting tonight. We need Brenda to incriminate herself publicly, on tape." "You want me to be bait," I stated flatly. Agent Davis nodded somberly. "We need to clearly show the entire community was victimized, not just your family. It's crucial for the broader conspiracy charges." That evening, I walked into the emergency HOA meeting with the wire taped uncomfortably to my ribs, my heart hammering against my chest. The community center buzzed, not with whispers this time, but with angry, frustrated voices. Maya squeezed my hand reassuringly as I passed, a silent gesture of solidarity and support. Brenda stood at the podium somehow, astonishingly, still maintaining her perfect composure despite the morning's dramatic raids. These accusations are completely unfounded, she announced loudly to the packed, tense room. The board has always acted solely in the community's best interests. I waited patiently until she finished her obviously practiced self-serving speech before standing up. Is that why you illegally demolished my bridge, Brenda? To isolate my sick sister while developers pressured her relentlessly to sell her island? Murmurs rippled instantly through the stunned crowd. Brenda's smile tightened into a thin, hard line. Your unauthorized structure clearly violated established bylaws, Amelia. This has absolutely nothing to do with your sister's property. Then explain these, I said clearly, as Maya and Robert Davis began distributing copies of documents to the shocked residents. Property assessments showing Sarah's island deliberately undervalued by millions, fake environmental reports conveniently claiming contamination near her shoreline, and damning bank records showing substantial payments directly to board members from Pine Harbor Development shell companies. Brenda's husband jumped up angrily. Where did you get those? That's confidential information. Actually, called out Ben Carter from the back of the room, they're public records, once they become evidence in a federal investigation. Brenda's perfect mask finally cracked. You ungrateful people, she shrieked, losing control completely. Do you have any idea what that resort would have done for our property values? We were all going to benefit. By forcing out my dying sister? I stepped closer to the podium, my voice ringing with indignation. By secretly changing zoning laws behind closed doors with your political allies? Your sister was offered fair compensation, Brenda snapped, her voice rising hysterically. If she wasn't so damn stubborn? So you admit the bridge removal was directly connected to the development plans to pressure her? I pressed, locking eyes with her. The room fell utterly silent. Brenda realized her colossal mistake instantly, far too late. Her eyes darted desperately to her husband, who was already backing slowly toward the exit. Senator Collins promised us protection, she blurted out, desperate now, grasping at straws. He said no one would look too closely if we just handled the local problems quietly. Just then, dramatically, the double doors at the back of the room swung open. Senator Robert Collins himself walked in, flanked by several stern-looking FBI agents, including Davis and Bell. I don't believe I promised any such thing, Brenda, the senator stated coolly, adjusting his tie. Brenda's face went absolutely ash-white. Victor, tell them. You approved everything, she pleaded, looking wildly around the room. The senator straightened his tie again, addressing the stunned crowd. I'm afraid Mrs. Peterson has been under tremendous personal pressure lately. Regardless, I'm here tonight to announce my office's full and unequivocal cooperation with this ongoing federal investigation. As agents moved swiftly to detain Brenda and several other implicated board members, I noticed Gary Miller slipping furtively out a side door. Would he actually escape while the others took the fall? And perhaps more importantly, what would happen to Sarah's island now that the whole sordid truth was finally coming to light? Not guilty, Brenda's lawyer announced confidently to the throng of reporters gathered on the courthouse steps. I watched the news clip later on my phone screen, my grip tightening until my knuckles turned white. How could this possibly happen? The case isn't over yet, Amelia, Agent Davis assured me patiently over the phone. The judge only dismissed 2 of the lesser counts. The major fraud and conspiracy charges are still moving forward. But honestly, I felt defeated. 3 long, draining months of legal battles had completely exhausted my savings and my energy. Predictably, the intense stress had caused Sarah's health to worsen significantly. And perhaps most frustratingly, Gary Miller had vanished without a trace, likely lounging somewhere tropical with no extradition treaty. They're coming after your land next, Amelia, Maya warned gravely that evening, bringing over a casserole she'd kindly cooked for Sarah and me. Apparently, Brenda's husband had already filed countersuits, absurdly claiming emotional distress and defamation against several of us, including me. Let them try, I said wearily, though fear knotted my stomach tightly. I simply couldn't afford more legal fees. The kitchen table soon disappeared under a pile of threatening letters from expensive, high-powered law firms. That night, sleep was impossible. Standing at my window, I stared across the dark water at Sarah's quiet, unlit house. Without the bridge, I'd have to wait until morning to check on her. What if she needed me during the night? Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught my eye, a flashlight beam sweeping methodically across Sarah's porch. Someone was over there. I frantically called 911 while simultaneously rushing down to the dock, throwing my small emergency boat hastily into the water without a second thought. The motor sputtered reluctantly in the cold night air as I raced across the dark, choppy water, panic rising in my chest. Halfway across, I saw headlights appear on the distant Peninsula Road. Police finally responding to my call, but frustratingly, they were taking the long route. I knew I'd reach Sarah first. I cut the motor early, drifting silently toward her dock. The beam of light now moved inside the house. Grabbing a heavy boat oar for protection, I crept stealthily up the path. The back door, the one I had broken, stood slightly ajar. Inside, I heard drawers being roughly emptied, papers shuffling frantically. Raising the oar, heart pounding against my ribs, I stepped cautiously into the dark kitchen. "Freeze!" I shouted loudly at the hunched figure rifling aggressively through Sarah's desk. The flashlight swung instantly toward me, momentarily blinding me. Amelia? That voice. It wasn't an intruder. Ben? I lowered the oar, utterly confused. Ben Carter? What on earth are you doing here? He held up a small thumb drive triumphantly, finding our salvation. Sarah called me earlier, said she suddenly remembered something incredibly important. Just then, blue lights flashed outside as the police finally arrived. Ben quickly explained Sarah kept meticulous backups of everything. Apparently, she has video footage of Gary Miller meeting with Senator Collins, discussing exactly how they planned to fake those environmental reports to force the sale of her island. That hidden video evidence changed absolutely everything. Within weeks, the senator's carefully constructed wall of protection crumbled completely as he faced his own indictment. Brenda's remaining legal defenses collapsed spectacularly when her personal financial records were subpoenaed, revealing hidden offshore accounts filled with illicit development money. But perhaps the biggest surprise came from quiet, elderly Mrs. Gable. It turned out she had been keeping meticulous handwritten records of every single HOA meeting for the past 12 years. Her incredibly detailed notes provided the precise timeline prosecutors needed, clearly showing how the scheme had insidiously evolved from simple, petty corruption to highly organized criminal fraud. "I always knew that woman was trouble," Mrs. Gable stated matter-of-factly when I thanked her profusely later. "Started years ago with her giving citations for my bird feeders while completely ignoring her friends' much larger violations." 2. At the final court hearing, I sat beside Sarah, who was now using a wheelchair but remained fiercely determined to face Brenda herself. The judge's words rang clearly through the hushed courtroom. "This court sentences Karen Mitchell, Brenda Peterson, to 8 years in federal prison for conspiracy, wire fraud, and misappropriation of funds." Brenda refused to even look at us as she was led away, her expensive designer suit now replaced by standard prison-issued clothes. 6 months later, we all gathered on a perfect sunny spring day to celebrate not just Sarah's incredible cancer remission, but also the completion of a new, wider, and much sturdier bridge connecting our properties, built entirely with funds received from the HOA restitution settlement. "Should we cut the ribbon?" Maya asked cheerfully, holding up a bottle of champagne, surrounded by all the neighbors who had bravely stood with us through everything. Sarah shook her head, smiling warmly. "No need for ceremony. This bridge isn't just for me and Amelia anymore. It's for everyone." And she was absolutely right. The settlement had, remarkably, transformed our community. The new HOA board, led energetically by Ben Carter and Mrs. Gable, had completely rewritten the bylaws, focusing now on actual community needs and improvements, rather than petty rules and vindictive power games. Children now played freely across lawns without fear of citations. Residents happily exchanged plants from vibrant gardens that once would have violated ridiculously restrictive approved species lists. And Sarah's Island, once coveted greedily by developers, had been permanently placed in a conservation trust, protecting its natural beauty forever. "You know what I learned from all this?" Sarah said thoughtfully, as we walked together across the new bridge, her strength returning more each day. Sometimes, the very thing someone tries hardest to take away from you becomes the one thing that ultimately saves you. I watched a young family picnicking happily on the shoreline below, new residents living in what had once been Gary Miller's house. Their joyful laughter drifted up sweetly on the gentle breeze. "Do you ever regret it?" Ben asked, joining us mid-span. "Standing up to them like that, knowing what it all would cost?" I looked at my sister, healthy and smiling beside me. I looked at our community, reborn and vibrant. I looked at the bridge that now connected us all, a symbol of resilience and unity. Some victories, I realized, aren't measured in courtrooms or financial settlements, but in the simple, profound freedom to walk across water to help someone you love. "Not for a single moment," I answered honestly, and I knew deep in my heart it was absolutely true. This story serves as a powerful reminder that one person's courage, especially when amplified by community solidarity, can indeed challenge and overcome even deeply entrenched corruption and injustice. It highlights that fighting for what's right, even when facing seemingly insurmountable odds and personal risk, is not only essential for protecting ourselves and our loved ones, but can also lead to positive transformation for an entire community. Never underestimate the power of your voice, the strength found in unity, and the importance of standing firm for your principles. What do you think about Amelia's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories.